Okay, hello. Welcome to everybody for this session of this fantastic conference. My name is Mary Takayanagi. I'm Senior Archivist at the Parliamentary Archives, and I'm your chair for this session to give Lindsay a bit of a break so she can carry on organising this fantastic conference. And I'm delighted to be delivering this In Conversation session with Lesley Abdela and Frances Scott. Excuse me any mispronunciation, Lesley, I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to talk. Oh, splendid, thank you. So I'll just briefly introduce the two of them, and then we've got some questions that we'll talk through and around, and I hope it will be a really interesting discussion and we'll have time for questions at the end. So first of all, Lesley Abdela was the founder of the 300 Group, established in 1980 as a national, apolitical, voluntary organisation to campaign for more women into Parliament, European Parliament, local government and public life. It provided training and skills development, established branches across the UK, held regular network and social events, and campaigned for the normalisation of women in politics and public life. Since then, Lesley has become an internationally recognised expert in political democracy building and organisational change, especially noted for her contribution to the development of democracy in countries of the former Soviet bloc, for her development of gender mainstreaming in the Nordic states, and for her commitment to gender equality and peace building in the former sites of conflict. And then we have Frances Scott. Frances is the founder of 50/50 Parliament, a cross-party campaign petitioning for debate and action for better gender balance, which envisaged a parliament where men and women legislate the laws of our land together in roughly equal numbers. She has a background in international business, but switched careers and trained as an antenatal teacher, setting up and running the Birth Trust for 15 years. She set up 50/50 Parliament in 2013, and it now works with all parties, running an inclusive intersectional campaign, taking action to build a better democracy by inspiring, encouraging and supporting women. Key interventions include the hashtag Ask Her to Stand and hashtag Sign Up to Stand programmes, and 50 participants in the latter stood as candidates in the most recent general election. A really good sign, I think. So, having heard about these two very amazing women, if perhaps we could start by talking about how you founded your respective organisations and what were perhaps the tipping points which sparked your interest in setting them up. Lesley, perhaps we could begin with you chronologically, since yours was first. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this. I feel very humbled. Right, it started, I was working as a researcher in Parliament, and I came back one day after lunch. And we're talking now about just before 1979, or not probably around 1979. I came back and the central lobby was full of women. And I asked what's going on. And it turned out there was a debate going on in the House of Commons about an amendment to the abortion bill. And I thought, that's odd. Why are all those men in there talking about abortion and all the women are out here in the central lobby? Put that in the back of my mind, and then the next tipping point was when I stood for Parliament in 1979 in the election when Margaret Thatcher was first elected, and she was one of only 19 women out of 635 MPs. And I was shocked. I absolutely had no idea of the imbalance. There were about 2.9% women in our Parliament. I was just stunned. Anyway, I kept belly aching to friends about this, and over breakfast one day, I say breakfast because I used to meet one or two friends for breakfast after we left our children at junior school, baby school. One of them, who was American, Connie Blackwell, said, well, you're going on and on about this, why don't you do something? So that's what tipped me into doing something.
Marvellous.
Over to you, Frances.
Thank you, Frances.
It resonates so profoundly with me. I was an international business executive for many years, wearing the shoulder pads and actually getting involved in business meetings, mainly with men. And then I trained to be an antenatal teacher with the NCT. And the thing that really frustrated me was that maternity services didn't really seem to feel like they were designed around the needs of women. And parenting, which I regard as a really important priority and job, didn't seem to be taken very seriously in all the policy making that was coming out of Westminster. And I was just getting very frustrated about this. And one day my 9-year-old daughter came bounding out of primary school saying, Mum, I've just been elected to school council. I said, that's fantastic. Are you representing the class? She said, no, of course not. There's always one boy and one girl on school council because our experiences are different. And I just thought, ka-ching, ka-ching, you know, surely that's how democracy should be designed. And I talked to people about this for about 5 years. And then finally, my older daughter by that point was going to university, and she said, oh, Mum, stop talking about it, do something. And she said, take a look at the No More Page 3 campaign, see what Lucy Ann Holmes has done. Read Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. And I mean, I was just so in admiration of these young women who were calling out sexism. You know, I had learnt to live with Page 3 of the Sun and just thought it was something we had to put up with. And so actually I copied the No More Page 3 campaign. I got some t-shirts made and I put up a petition on change.org. And that's kind of where it started. I then, in fact, on February, it was Valentine's Day, the first time I went to demonstrate in Trafalgar Square in 2014. And Baroness Scotland saw me in the crowd with the t-shirt on, and I had a few in a backpack. And she came down to meet me afterwards, and she said, that's just what we need. And she was prepared to stand next door to me. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, if a QC, as she was then, the Queen's Counsel, she now, of course, King's Counsel, and a woman who sits in the House of Lords thinks that this is relevant, then I must be onto something. And Stella Creasy started to support it. And I learned how to do Twitter, and, you know, one thing's led to another. And yeah, here we are. We are now a friendly network of people here to support women who want to progress in politics. We don't have a, you know, we're not petitioning anymore. We're actually working to create the change that we want to have.
So you both had different and yet somehow very in common experiences which led you to set up these organisations, and you both chose the non-party and non-partisan approach. So perhaps you could both reflect a bit on the advantages and challenges of that non-party approach, and how far have parties been to engage with you, because I think they all have their wings set up to encourage women these days, but perhaps that wasn't always the case, Lesley, if you'd like to.
I had not a clue. I was as green as they come. I thought it would take 6 months, which seemed such a sensible thing to do, to run a campaign and get more women into Parliament. I had no idea that it was going to take this long. And so-called mother of parliaments. And so I wasn't part of any women's movement. So we contacted when we got a list of women's organisations, we contacted them, like the Business and Professional Women's Organisation, the Women's Institute, all sorts of women's organisations. And we contacted the women's wings of political parties. And indeed, there had always, for many, many years, been women's wings, often misused just to fundraise by the men parties, but also a few standing bravely for local council and parliament in those days. Very few. So we contacted them and had to think, you know, what were we going to do? So there are some useful things about being very green, is that you don't know what's impossible. So we started by having a meeting in the headquarters of Gingerbread. That was the organisation for one-parent families, and Julia Kaufman said we could use her office. So we invited about 35 mainly women came, and from the women's wings of the Conservative and Labour Party, then Liberals, still Liberals, but also from other women's organisations. And we wanted to know, was there an organisation focusing on this? Some of the women's organisations included women in politics and public life as one of their aims, but it was amongst lots of other things. And there didn't seem to be a single organisation focused solely on getting women elected to Parliament, local council, etc. So then we thought, well, how do we launch this thing? And we didn't have any cash, of course. And somebody said, well, if you can get a member of Parliament to book a room, committee room, you can have a free room in Parliament. Mm-hmm. So we booked a room that we started big. We booked the Grand Committee room. the largest, and just sent out, I remember this is before internet, before faxes, everything was done, addressing envelopes by hand, etc., etc. And we sent out as many invitations as we could. No idea of the rules or anything. So about 400 people turned up to the room, which is meant to have about 150 or 200. Because I had a parliamentary pass still for being a researcher, I had also fly posted the ladies' news in Parliament, because a lot of the parliamentary staff were women. So I turned up for this launch where we had representatives from all parties on the platform, and the police on St. Stephen's on the door said, what are you come for? And I said, come for this meeting in the Grand Committee room. And then, boasting, I said, I'm the organiser. And from nowhere, in the shadows, a woman police officer appeared. And she said, would you mind coming with me? And she took me to the first of the women's loos near the door. She said, did you put that poster up there? And I said, yes. She said, you do realise it's against the law or you're not allowed to put up posters in the palace, because it was considered a palace in those days, the House of Parliament. Anyway, she said, well, get on. She sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, don't do it again. And there were some amazing people. I mean, Dave Nolan was in the audience. Lord Fenner Brockway, who was already, I think, in his 90s, a wonderful socialist man. He was sitting on the floor, and he was in his 90s, and it was an incredible meeting. Anyway, after that, we realised also that neither the media nor the political parties really had even noticed how few women were in Parliament. It just wasn't an issue. And my partner, Jim Simmons, then sort of started doing a lot of media campaigning to say, to the men in media particularly, you can either kill this dead by mocking it, or you can help support it. And the reasons why he thought it was a good idea, he is a man, etc., etc. So it was a mixture of things. I'm sure, I don't want to go on too long, so I want to give Francis plenty of airtime, so we can continue after. Francis, over to you.
Okay. Well, it's fascinating to hear that, Lesley. And I think one needs to look at the stats, and as you rightly say, when you started, it was just absolutely dire. When I started in 2013, only 23% of our MPs were women. Women were outnumbered 3-1 in the House of Commons. I just couldn't believe it, like you. And if you look further into the stats, it's now 2-1 in the Commons, but it's still 3-1 in the Lords. And in 100 years or so since women had the right to vote, way over 5,000 MPs have been elected, but there are still fewer than 600 women who've been elected. So there definitely seems to be a systemic problem in terms of women's participation. And my view is it's about building a better democracy. It isn't really a partisan issue. It's about female empowerment and proper rightful representation. And so that's kind of where I come at this from. And that's why it's important to engage with all political parties. I mean, women are like men in that they have a range of political persuasions and all sorts of beliefs, and that we're as diverse as the male population. In fact, women are the majority. We are the majority in life, but a minority in Parliament. And it just strikes me as really curious in what is meant to be a representative democracy that the majority of people are so underrepresented. And if women are not participating fully in our democratic systems, then we need to be asking why and ensuring that they can. Because I think it's very problematic if the majority of the population are not able actually to gain seats. So that's where I came at this. And very similar to you, Stella Creasy kindly booked us a room. I had no idea it was possible. And by that point, I was working with an organisation, a feminist organisation, and hundreds of us met on the railings, all wearing our T-shirts and marching through the House of Commons. And it just felt fantastic. And to have that room full of women demanding equal seats and equal say was amazing. And so many MPs kept coming and wanting to speak. It was also truly incredible. This was in 2014. In 2017, we launched the Ask Her to Stand campaign, and Justine Greening attended and Jess Phillips hosted, and we had a cross-party panel of MPs, and in fact we had men and women from each party on the panel, and the Women's Institute was involved. That was amazing. That was December 2016 actually. Then I had a personal tragedy in that my husband died in February 2017. It was just after the huge Women's March in London. And so I personally had to put things on the back burner. But what was so exciting was by that point, there were enough people involved that they really wanted to take it forward. And we really sort of motored with the Ask Her to Stand campaign. And then in 2018, it was absolutely wonderful. We ran an event in Parliament with Elector were there. It was wonderful to have them involved. And lots of people were involved. And it was a pretty chaotic day, as Elector know. I mean, because nobody would guarantee anything. And anyway, but the thing that was most important and exciting to me was that in Westminster Hall, where, of course, the dear Queen is now lying in state, we had 300 women in that Westminster Hall chanting for equal seats and equal say that day. And they were drawn from all different parties, many different political persuasions, and a very diverse range of women had turned up to Parliament that day, and it was super exciting. So, things have just gone from strength to strength.
So, if I could add a little bit on that too, because you've prompted my memory. First of all, I don't think you can see. I'm not going to read on because I'm not sure I still fit it, but there's spaces in the house.
Fantastic. Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Of comments. One space in the house, ... of comments. And like you, it's interesting you mentioned Westminster Hall, because of also seeing all the pictures this week of the Queen lying there in Westminster Hall, jogged my memory, because so much happened through the committee room, the Grand Committee room of Westminster Hall, and it became a sort of central part of things. But what we soon found was we set up 43, 44 local groups around England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland within 3 or 4 years, and all ran by volunteers unpaid from their kitchens, their living rooms, their bedrooms. And I stress again, we didn't have internet, we didn't have fax, so we had just principles. As long as they agreed that they were open to all political parties and no party, because quite a lot of women didn't belong to a political party because the parties hadn't bothered enough with them. And that we had a mission that also said, and diversity. Well, we didn't use the word diversity in those days, but it had to be inclusive to everybody. As long as they did that, there were no other rules. And then so many women did so much work all around the 4 nations. It was just incredible. And what was very good was that we found we could make the parties. I came from an advertising agency background, so I saw it as a marketing plan, really. One was to make people aware of the campaign, and the other was to provide, if I can put it in marketing terms, the good products. Because if women came forward and couldn't do it, they were or perceived not to do it because of lack of confidence, or because the parties weren't choosing them for seats they could win, then we were going to get nowhere. So we started asking women what they wanted that would help them. And there were things like, how do you speak in public? How do you give TV interviews? How does the budget work? A lot of international things. So we organised debates in committee rooms of Parliament with parliamentarians and people like Jenna Fuchs, who later became Deputy Speaker, chairing. we had one of the advertising agencies lent us a TV studio on Saturdays, and some of the well-known women presenters and men came and did free training for women and so on. So we developed, it's hard to remember, but in those days, nobody trained anybody for politics, men or women. So we had to learn everything as we went along, just try it out and see what worked and what didn't. And so many people did so much, just voluntary. I worked 5 years unpaid and didn't have money left. And when I handed it on to others, and I thought, I'd be right out of their hair. And I went for a year for a sabbatical in Africa, in the Gambia, in my partner. And I was up country in a very remote place, terribly hot day, lying on my bed thinking, oh, I can't take the heat, no air conditioning up there. And somebody knocked on the door and said, I was at the High Commission and I saw there was a letter for you. Shall I put it under your door? And a letter came under the door. When I opened it, it was the 300 group limits. And I realised you never quite escape once you start something. Francis, you'll find the same thing, I'm sure. And so I'll sort of hand back to you.
Yes, I think what you were saying there, Lesley, about training was actually really interesting, because both groups place a lot of value on training and networking. So perhaps, Francis, you could now say a bit about sort of key features of this strategy and the effects.
Yeah, it is absolutely essential, really, to give women confidence and to create a network. So we call ourselves the 50-50 network. The Old Boys Network has been around and operating on a kind of subliminal level forever. And by the way, men are welcome in our network. We need men to be engaged with this campaign. We need men's support, which is where the Ask Her to Stand campaign comes from. The evidence suggests that women need to be asked 3 times, at least 3 times, before they will consider putting themselves forward into public life. And
can I just jump in there? So sorry to interrupt you, Francis, because that's what we call. We actually used to run a session called Who Me? I couldn't possibly.
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. So you have to keep repeatedly asking women. And so that's where our Ask Her to Stand campaign stemmed from. And now we want everyone to ask women to sign up to stand with 50-50. And when women sign up to stand with 50-50, we do 4 things. We send women an interactive personal political profile, and it is wonderful that the technology has improved, so that we can plot women's progress if they interact with this profile. We set them up with a 50-50 buddy. This is peer-to-peer support. So that there's someone else, a friendly face, a bit like if you're doing sub-aqua, if you take the plunge into politics, you need someone else who you can talk to about the daily grind and the issues that you come across. The third thing that we do is we invite women to bite-sized meetings. And the fourth thing we do is we invite women from diverse groups, women of different different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, women with disabilities. We invite them to special Connect Reflect sessions. And for women from the LGBT community, we give one-to-one private support. So that's bespoke support that we offer to women with protected characteristics. And I just really wanted to say that COVID, of course, was a tragedy. But one of the things that has really we've managed to achieve since COVID is that everybody has learned how to use Zoom meetings. And it's meant that we can go beyond the Westminster bubble. And I think this is truly inspirational and an improvement in our democracy. The idea now that we can run these meetings with women, from up in Aberdeen all the way down to Plymouth, and it's just wonderful to see the scale, the reach of these meetings now. So the bite-sized meetings that we offer have really been transformational, and they happen every week. And Tuesday is for the Labour Party, Wednesday is for the Lib Dems, and Thursday is for the Conservatives, so that women can get party-specific guidance on how to get selected. and we've become a charity. So our aim now is really to help women get selected for winnable seats. And then we hand over to the parties, because the election process actually has to be, it's the responsibility of the parties. So that's the kind of training and support that we're offering.
So coming back to this, the impact of Zoom, which of course means that Lesley can join us remotely today. Perhaps that sort of segues nicely into saying a little bit more about diversity, which you have both already mentioned, because there's much more awareness perhaps today of the way that gender interacts with race, disability, sexuality and so on. And we're more perhaps alert to the need for more diverse experience and voices. But perhaps you could both say a little bit about how that did, Lesley, or is Frances, shaping the work that you did and do.
Well, actually, I will come back to that, but I just want to add something. Because, as Frances reminded us, we didn't have such easy technology. We had to think, and we didn't have big funds. We got a little bit from Monetary Trust for one member of staff later on, and an office in Lion Perman Street. So we had to use our imagination. And I was trying to think how to have a conference to bring everybody together. Frances was saying about the importance of the networking and so on. And I heard that DFDS, the Danish shipping company, I heard it on the radio on a travel ship, were starting a new ferry boat service from Felixstowe over to Esbjerg in Denmark. And they were offering cheap tickets. So I called them up and I said, if I could get you lots of publicity, how cheap would you let us have tickets? And we got tickets for £35 for 2 nights, all wonderful Danish food we could eat, smorgasbord, etc. 4 hours in Denmark to meet with Danish politicians as part of it. We brought 150 women, and £35, even in those days, was not much for this. And 150 women came, and we did this 4 years running. We did training on the ship, we did a lot of networking, mentoring, and so forth. But for some of the women, it was the first time they had been away from husbands and family, and couldn't be called back, so the middle of the sea couldn't call them back. So we could actually really work at this. And we did it 4 years running, and the 4th year we hit a force 9 gale in September. Everybody was sick. And what we had done was, of course, the TV crews came with us as well. So it was on television, it was newspapers, everyone, The Guardian was with us. The first one, The Guardian had written, they overheard 2 men on the ship saying, because they let us have the discotheque in the daytime for our courses and conference. And 2 men on the ship, who were ordinary passengers, were heard saying, what do you think all those women are doing in their own daytime? And one of them said, oh, I don't know, it's probably bingo. That was the attitude. But the last time, everybody was sick, except a wonderful Australian woman who'd been one of the first people to vote in Australia. She was in her 80s. And when I came down to breakfast in the morning, she was sitting there surrounded by Foster's beer cans and said, my mother always said, the best way to cope with the sea is alcohol, dear. Lots of good advice from people. But to come back to your answer the diversity issue, we actually had it written into our mission, everyone from all backgrounds, etc. We didn't use the word diversity in those days. It wasn't really known. When I say those days, I don't feel that old, but we are talking about 1979, 1881, 82, around then. But we did reach out, and we tried to encourage people to come from different ethnic backgrounds. Very few responded, but we did get a few Asian women first, of whom one, I remember particularly, Savannah Gifford was later elected as local councillor in Harrow, but a few others also got onto local council. But it was still, Diane Abbott was sort of dreaming in the future. It was still a very, very different world. I mean, it really was a different world. And things I'm very happy to say on diversity have changed. I know we've got still a huge way to go, but they've changed a lot.
Well, perhaps
I'd just like to also say very quickly, so I give Frances more time. is that the 6 challenges, I've now worked in about 50 countries on these issues, and it's amazing how the challenges are the same, and I'm sure you'll sort of resonate with these, Francis. I call them the 6 C's. Culture, where men are perceived and viewed as leaders and women as followers. Cronyism, the old boy network, and that's where your mentoring is so important, in networking. Candidate selection processes. We found in many countries it's not, including what it was like here, it wasn't that women couldn't get elected, it's they weren't getting chosen by the parties for seats the parties expected to win.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the big battles. Thank goodness that's changed a lot too. Chronic lack of cash. Women in most cultures have less access to cash than men, spare cash. Men tended to, they were quite happy to spend money on going to football. I'm being very generous, sexist here, but going to a football match. If a woman had spare cash, she felt she should spend it on the family, not on her own political career. There was a lot of that. Chronic lack of time. Women were less likely to have the time to take part that's demanded. And chronic lack of confidence. So the 6 C's was culture, cronyism, candidate selection processes, chronic lack of cash, chronic lack of time. And chronic lack of confidence, of course, was the other one. And then we found that was compounded if you had a disability or you came from an ethnic background or certain religious groupings, etc. And that's why I was very interested to hear what you just said, Francis, about the one-to-one mentoring
perhaps
for diversity.
let's hear a bit more about that then, Francis, the diversity and...
Yes, no, obviously diversity is the heart of this movement. We're calling for the majority of people to be involved. Women are as diverse as men are in terms of population. What was very reassuring to us is, as you rightly said, 50 of the women standing in the last general election had actually signed up to stand with us, and 9 of them went on to be elected, but 20% of those were actually from diverse ethnic backgrounds. And so we have been attracting women from many different backgrounds, and that's very reassuring. But it is really important to offer the extra support and acknowledge that some women face double discrimination and higher hurdles. And so that's where our bespoke sessions come in. And we offer these actually to the whole campaign. It's not just the women that sign up to stand. And we have a diversity committee that is drawn from all parties and includes women with many different protected characteristics. And it's been fantastic to get their guidance about what's the best way to support them. So once a month, we run a session called Connect and Reflect, which is for women of different ethnicities. And once a month, we run, on a Monday evening, we run a session called For Women Facing Higher Hurdles, and that's for women with seen and unseen disabilities. And these sessions are actually hosted and facilitated by women, of different ethnicities, and by women who have disabilities, because I think that they can speak with more authenticity and experience. It was decided, the Diversity Committee decided themselves, that the support that we offer the LGBT community should actually be more private and bespoke and more one-to-one. So that is the way we choose to support women from the LGBT community. And I might add, we are an intersectional campaign, so we will support trans women who might want to stand. Not many have actually expressed an interest, but we do have 1 or 2 trans women who are part of our campaign, and we're proud to say so.
Thank you, Francis. Listening to the two of you talk about your campaigns, I'd like to maybe let us reflect on how far the scale and nature of the obstacles that you've both worked so hard to tackle have changed over the years. Do you find it disheartening that we're still having to reflect on the same issues decades on? And is it alarming when other issues, think bullying, harassment, which we've only mentioned sort of briefly, seem maybe worse than ever? Or is there any cause for optimism that we can perhaps find?
No, I want to echo Lesley's point. You know, I set up 50/50 Parliament and thought everyone would sign the petition. I just cannot believe that we still have a society that doesn't agree with this aspiration. The Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister, well, the recent Prime Minister hasn't, but the ex-Prime Minister, all party leaders have said they agree with this and have video. We have video to prove that, which is great. So, you know, it comes back to the old suffragettes. We need deeds, not words. You know, put it into action. There's resistance to, you know, all-female shortlists. That which, you know, is how the Labour Party managed to achieve their success in terms of equal representation, which they do have on their green benches. But at the very least, we should have 50/50 shortlists and 50/50 women on the platform. Women need an equal space in politics. And the reason it matters, because a lot of people, including women, say, oh, I don't care, you know, we live in a representative democracy, men can represent me. Representation shapes policy. And there's plenty of evidence that when you have more women in the room, women's concerns are taken more seriously. And take the Neil Parish incident, a man watching pornography in the Commons. It's only because one or two women chose to mention this and point it out. There's safety in numbers. Historically, previously, women had to toe the line. They had to conform to the peer group pressure. But now that we have more women engaged and involved and in positions of power, they can actually start to call out this kind of behaviour, to your point about behaviour. But it isn't just about the behaviour, it's about forming policy. And it's kind of worrying that we seem to be going back. Take the matter of abortion and the Roe versus Wade, you know, the backtracking there. This is really serious. These matters impact women's lives, and we should be involved in all policy making, but not just the women's issues. It's our world too. We have a joint responsibility to build a better world, to care for our environment. And we need women involved in making, you know, coming up with the solutions. It's also about resources. Women, half our graduates, half our undergraduates are women. Women represent an incredible untapped pool of resource, and we need their involvement. And if they're not attracted to politics, if the intelligent women are not attracted to politics, we need to ask why and make sure that they are. And last but not least, it's about respect. And Parliament and our powerful people should be showing respect for women, for our opinions and our life experience. And so Lesley has her 6 C's. I have my 4 R's. And onto that, I'll add a 5th. It's rightful. This is a human right. Women need rightful representation. We should have equal seats and equal say, and our parliamentary system and our democracy should recognise that and ensure that we are properly involved. And if we don't do it now, you know, it'll be my daughters and my son, who I care massively about and is impacted by this, will be having to make the same kind of arguments in half a century. You know, only 12 extra women were elected at the last election. At that rate, it's going to take till 2060 for gender equality of representation. And to my mind, that's too long. It really is an urgent matter.
Lesley, would you like to come back?
Yeah, I will. I'm half full glass and half empty glass, both optimistic, etc. Something I've learned, Frances, over the years, she said, is everything takes at least 16 times longer than you wanted it to, if not more, if you're trying to change the world. And one of the things that encourages me is every time I give a talk in a different country, and I look up the list of how many countries have over 20% women, or 30% women, or 40% women, the figures globally have improved. And actually here in this country it's improved ever since we started 300 women, not just because of 300 women, as you rightly said, the different parties, the Labour Party, Joyce Gould, who was the women's officer at the time, was the first one, I think, to introduce having at least one woman on the shortlist. And I know from interviewing her that Mo Molan, who was such a wonderful British woman, Labour politician, and Northern Ireland, particularly in Northern Ireland talks, she would not have been chosen for her seat if they hadn't had to have a woman that realised in her constituency they hadn't got a woman on the shortlist, they better find one. And what a fine one they found. So the parties have done stuff, some parties better than others, but it's gone forward all the time, but too slowly, I quite agree. But other things too have got better. And by the way, I like we were called the 300 group because at that stage there were 635 MPs in Parliament. And we thought we couldn't be the 317 and a half group. And so we thought that was roughly half of Parliament. And we're now up to 225. So I hope that, Francis, you're going to do your magic. You'll take us from 225 to 300 before I die.
Yeah, we need another 100 women elected.
And please invite me to the celebration party.
Yeah.
So that I think it has gone forward. And one of the big jumps forward was when Labour did the, at the time controversial, they took the controversial act of having half the seats that were empty that they expected to win had to have a woman candidate. It was controversial, but it kick-started, and it went to 121 women. I had wished for 100 for that. I went and wished on Sylvia Bankhurst's grave in Ethiopia for 100 at that election. I was there the week before the election here. And it went to 121. So it has moved forward, not fast enough, I quite agree. But one of the things that I think has really finally accelerated too, which is making a difference on women in politics, is up until about 10 years ago, one of the things that some of us were also campaigning on was the fact that so few, at election time, so few of the pundits and commentators and anchors on media were women. Hardly any. There were a few, but very few. And that meant that people didn't even notice, that rolled on to have, what women's opinions not being visible, etc. Very few of the women candidates got interviewed, etc. The last 10 years, if we now look on British media, not on media in every country, but British media and stations like CNN and States and so on, there are, I would say, as many, if not more, of the key political anchors are now women. And just think about and from all different ethnic minorities too. So that's been a big acceleration. You asked for whether it's gone forward or not gone forward. These things have made a difference. They made a big difference. And I wish I'd chosen the name 50/50. And I'm very pleased to say that I was tempted, but because of all the certain things to do with the Queen dying and things, I thought it would not be perhaps the right thing to do now. But this week, I had a group of women from Sierra Leone, who are now here in Britain, who set up, when I went out there 20 years ago, they set up the 50/50 Sierra Leone group to get more women elected. And when they left, they came down for the other day, here in Sussex. And when they left, we all did the men and women dancing men and women standing side by side, which is the song that their campaign song, which I hope you'll adopt from 50/50. They want to come and help your group, by the way.
Well, that would be wonderful. I want to add something about all women shortlists.
Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, I get very frustrated, for example, on peace talks when so few women are represented in peace talks. Yes, on the environment. Very few women were in the key positions for decision-making on the big environmental conference in Glasgow. We have so much still to do, and thank goodness for your 50/50 group, Francis.
So I think, Francis, you wanted to...
Well, look, massive thanks for that, Lesley. And I actually have to credit a man with this name because I was super frustrated and I was running a postnatal group and a young man came along with his daughter. He was so proud she'd just been born. And he asked me how I was, and I said, my head is pounding with politics. I really think women should, should have equal seats, gender equality of representation. And he said, I said, are you interested in politics? He said, yes, I did PPE at Oxford. I said, oh, you did PPE at Oxford? He said, but I never thought about gender equality of representation. Oh. I thought, oh my God, that says it all, right? Anyway, he went away and then he sent me an email the following day. He said, Frances, I had no idea it was so bad. There are 65 countries that have better gender equality of representation than the UK's, more women in their governments. And only 23% of our MPs are women. This is appalling. And the very next day he got back to me and said, oh, by the way, the domain name 5050 Parliament's available. You might want to register that. And I mean, I have to say, I had been wandering around thinking, what could I call this campaign? Because I think that if you want to head in a direction, it's a bit like Google Maps. If you want to know where you're heading, you have to put in your destination. And, this is our destination. We're not actually telling people how to get there, or the parties indeed. All women shortlists have been raised. That is one solution, but it's not one that some parties or some people feel comfortable with. They feel it's tokenistic, etc., etc. So we're not actually telling people how to get there. We're just saying this is where we'd like to arrive. My daughter's at university in Edinburgh. I know how to get up to Edinburgh, but there are many different routes. And so as long as we can all agree about the destination, then you can find your own way there. I would like to just add something about all-women shortlists, though. The Conservatives recently had an all-women shortlist in Canterbury. That's because all the best people putting themselves forward were women. Now, really, statistically, you might expect that to be the case. We have had all-men shortlists forever, and we need to feel comfortable with the idea that all the best people might be women. Why not? And so I would just like to sort of throw that in there about the all-women shortlist. But really, I would like all of you to take on board this campaign. And if you meet a woman who you think might would be great as a representative for your community, tell her about 5050 Parliament, encourage her to sign up to stand so that we can help her take the next step.
So
Frances, you can celebrate it as well, because UK has actually moved up. It's now 47th out of 188 countries. So even recently it's moved up a bit. There are now 31 countries with over 40% women, which again, it's moving the right direction, but it's a bit like Millicent Fawcett, the suffragist campaigner, once said. She said it always moves forward, mostly moves forward, getting rid of the things that are stopping women come forward. But she said sometimes it moves so slowly. It's like watching a glacier. You cannot see it move, but it's moving all the time. And it's because of people like you and many, many other, as well as we all know, in all the parties. I'd like to pick up, if I may, what you said about the quotas. I used to be very opposed to quotas, but I've looked into, having watched in many countries, it's sometimes needed as a temporary special measure. But it's what type of quota? And if you say at least 40% women, then those women are treated, as you rightly say, almost like a second-class representative. But if you use the wording at least 40% women and at least 40% men, and the other 20% can be whoever they want to be, you then have the same rules for everybody. It's the same rules for men and for women. So they can't say that it was special seats reserved for women, and so those women are quota queens. I'm quoting now from another country where I heard them dubbed that. So sometimes you do need some special measures, I think. I'm now convinced, as a temporary special measure. Whether we have gone past that in Britain, I'm not quite sure. I think maybe we have. We certainly haven't when it comes to peace talks. Anywhere in the world, so few women having a say in their countries after conflicts.
So we are coming to the end of our time now. So I'm just going to ask you both briefly if you could maybe identify your most significant achievement, what you're most proud of, or what you would most likely to change in politics today, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions. Lesley, would you like to start?
I dreaded this question because either one sounds like one's boasting, or or what? And I think one of the things perhaps is we did start people raising the issue when it was invisible. And I think we're quite proud of that. But it was interesting, it was so many different people. And like Francis, the men, there's been a lot of help from men as well as women. And I think that should be recognised. I also, we had support from the speakers of the Parliament, and there's so many people I would love to mention what everybody's saying. By the way, one of the very first people who came and supported 300 Room was Elizabeth Valance, who was a fellow of Queen Mary College and Queen Mary University, and whose book also was about women in politics very early on. So we've come full cycle now. Back here with you.
Thank you, Lesley. Francis, would you like to?
Well, I think 2018, November 2018, having all those women in Parliament was just absolutely amazing. And you know, to amplify Leslie's point, you know, this is a teamwork. This requires teamwork and a group effort. So it's wonderful to have so many people involved with 50-50 now. The other thing I think that was pretty major was when all the party leaders made videos, including the Prime Minister, on Ask Her to Stand Day. I think it was 2020 and 2021. And you know, the hashtag Ask Her to Stand trended on the 21st of November. And I really want that day to become something that, you know, we recognise in the calendar. So that kind of felt like a historic moment for me when all the party leaders were actually in agreement that this change needed to happen. And actually, I guess, you know, even more recently when I was ranting about Neil Parish on the radio and about a day later, I said, you know, we really want a parliament that draws on the brightest and the best, including the 32 million women that live and work in the UK. And then Oliver Dowden, chair of the Conservative Party, the next day was saying, oh, we want 50% of our MPs to be women because we want to draw upon the brightest and the best. And I thought, oh, great, you know, the message is getting through somehow.
Imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. So,
anyway,
yeah. Thank you both very much. I would like to ask if there are any questions from our audience here today in the last few minutes. And we have the roving mics, I'm assuming. Okay, I see a hand at the back on the side there. Do we have the mics? We do. Okay.
Hi, okay. I'm Rose Dupperton from the University of Birmingham. Thank you both for such an interesting discussion. I'll kind of preface this by saying also thank you for doing such important work. But I'm interested in just this kind of idea that, as you have acknowledged, that Parliament and our political system is really not kind of built for women in its kind of inception, both in terms of culture and in terms of like the way it functions. So like, for instance, having to kind of be in Westminster to vote if you have young children, etc. And of course, that kind of hostility is felt even more acutely, as you've talked about, by women who are disabled or women of colour, queer women, etc. And I guess I kind of have two questions around that. Of firstly, is there ever kind of a sense of conflict in kind of encouraging women to enter a system that is so kind of hostile to them? I'm kind of thinking particularly of like the more we found out about like women like Diane Abbott's experience, you know, to what extent is there conflict in encouraging kind of young black women to enter that system? And I suppose then kind of on the back of that, of what is the role then in kind of achieving a 50-50 parliament, of changing the system? Like, to what extent should we ask women to kind of train themselves into a system that kind of fundamentally isn't really built for them?
Yeah, no, I so hear you on that. Yeah, why should women be the battering ram? You know, Hillary Clinton says to get the sexism out of politics, we need to get more women into politics. But why should women have to experience the sexism in going there? I guess it comes back to what I was just saying about Neil Parish. You know, there is safety in numbers. And the more people that are there, and you know, a sisterhood does develop, in fact, even across the benches. It's very, and even with our campaign, it's wonderful to see women working together, indeed supported by men as well, you know, to make this change happen. So I think, but you're right too about, you know, in terms of asking about the system. And it's fascinating to see, you know, given Stella Creasy, her experience of motherhood in Parliament, Tulip Siddiq, you know, who had to be wheeled through, I think she was going to have a cesarean anyway, heavily pregnant or whatever. And you know, the women being there, I mean, and they're brave women, you're absolutely right, but the fights that they're having and the points that they're raising mean that they are paving the way and making a more parent-friendly Parliament. And actually, parents are pretty underrepresented in Parliament. And I can see Sarah Child up there, who knows the stats better than me. She's done some research into this. So, you know, mothers are underrepresented, but so are fathers. And as an institution, it's not very parent-friendly. And I think the opportunities, you know, from a technological point of view, are there for parents to participate. It is possible for people to participate in democracy without being physically present. But of course, the old guard are very reluctant for this kind of technological change. But I mean, I think people like you are the future. You know, my daughters would have no problem with technology and using it in a democratic way. So. I guess I feel there's hope, and I think the system can change, but we do need to participate and support women, and that's what we're here to do. That's why we have a buddy system, recognising that taking the plunge into politics requires additional support.
Lesley, would you like to
Yes,
come
I
back?
actually think politics is a lot nastier than it was back when I was a researcher and when we were running 300 Group. I think I love new technology, and that's why I'm using it now. But it's a force for good and a force for bad. And I think some of the nastiness and threats to everybody, but also to women particularly, who come forward in politics and public life, that there has to be, I mean, I believe in free speech, absolutely. But when it tips over into death threats and really nasty stuff in the media against women in politics, we can't just let that go. We have to tackle that as well. So it's the whole issue. And what you said about parents, I'm afraid we had the same discussions 40 years ago. That Parliament should be truly the mother of parliaments, and that means mothers and fathers comfortable working there. So I'm really pleased with taking that onwards and upwards too.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we could go on all night, but I think we have also reached 5 o'clock and there will be another panel following shortly that we need to accommodate. So if you could all just join me in thanking Lesley and Frances very much.